How did the young, rich socialite Abby Choi end up dead in a pot of boiling soup? I'm Brandy, and this is Killer Bites, the show giving you bite-sized coverage of the hottest true crime cases. This case still seems to be evolving, as it is relatively new, but here's what we have up to date at this point. This case brings up a big question. Should you really remain friends with your ex? This has been an ongoing debate since the beginning of time, but there's never a clear answer. Many people stay friends or stay friendly with their ex even after they break up, and they say it's perfectly normal and fine. But maybe you'll think twice about being friends with an ex after you hear this crazy and chilling story. This case involves the young, rich socialite Abby Choi. Abby went on to get married to her teenage sweetheart, Alex Kwong. They had known each other for years and been together for years, and they felt they were totally in love. 18 years old is really young to get married, as many of her close family and friends pointed out, but Abby didn't care. Alex did not come from a wealthy family like Abby. In fact, Alex came from a relatively poor family, but Abby didn't mind that at all. She was young and in love and wanted to spend the rest of her life with her beloved Alex. She thought she had enough money for the both of them, so it should never have to be a problem. She had enough money to not only take care of her and Alex, but Alex's whole family too. So the pair tied the knot. They settled down and had 2 kids right away. But after a short time of being married, there was trouble in paradise. After being married for 3 years, the two decided it was time to get divorced in 2015. The exact reasoning behind the divorce was never revealed. It is reported that Abby never spoke ill of her ex-husband. She never hinted at any of their marital struggles, which that is pretty crazy. I mean, obviously there had to be a reason behind getting divorced, and usually the reason comes to light, but not in this case. Neither Abby nor her ex-husband ever said a peep about why they were calling it quits. Pretty impressive to keep something like that to yourself and not to share with anyone. Meanwhile, I'm dying to know the true reason for getting divorced. And even though they were getting divorced, Abby told Alex and his family not to worry. She would still take care of them financially. Can you believe that? Seriously, Abby is so sweet for doing that. Most divorces are not so amicable. She told them that at the end of the day, we are all still family. We have kids together, so we should remain in each other's lives and make the most of our situation. But that's easier said than done. So what does that mean, that she's gonna take care of them financially? I assumed she would give them a lump sum of money and be like, okay, have a good life, but no, that's not what happened. After the divorce, she purchased a home for Alex and his entire family to live in. And this was not just any home, but a freaking $10 million condo in an ultra-exclusive area of Hong Kong, like the Beverly Hills of Hong Kong. We've covered a lot of cases on Killer Bites, but I have never heard of anything like this. A couple getting divorced and then buying the ex a $10 million house? That's actually insane. But it's important to note that China has some weird tax rules. Something along the lines of you get a huge tax break if you're purchasing your first home. However, once you go on to purchase multiple properties, you get taxed a great deal more. In order to avoid having a huge tax bill on the $10 million condo, Abby asked Alex's father if she could purchase the home, but put the home down under his name. Obviously, he obliged. This was a great deal for him. Doing this saved Abby millions of dollars in taxes. And it didn't stop there. Abby didn't just buy them a dope house. She would also pay for their daily expenses and house expenses. Ex-wife/ex-daughter-in-law of the year award definitely goes to Abby Choi. As I mentioned earlier, Alex and his family did not come from a lot of money. They were actually pretty bad with money. Alex's dad was a police officer who did not make much money throughout his career, and he actually ended up resigning after there were some allegations of him getting too close to a case he was working and actually raping one of the victims he was supposedly trying to help. He was unemployed after that. Alex's brother, Anthony, was horrible with money and a very bad businessman. He was already in debt, $300K. And then Anthony actually asked Abby for a personal loan to help him to get his business off the ground. He wanted to open up a restaurant in Hong Kong. Abby gladly helped him with his business by financially backing him, but things didn't work out like planned. He ended up in even more debt, and the new restaurant business had to close down. After the failing restaurant, he was unemployed and looking for work. Alex suggested he become Abby's personal driver. Abby was happy to employ Alex's brother as her personal driver and gave him a salary well above the average salary of a driver. This led to Anthony and Abby becoming very close friends. Some might even consider them to be best friends. I mean, driving around every day with each other and spending that much time together would bond anyone together. There were even posts made on social media. They both had posted pictures together on their own social medias. Meanwhile, Alex, after his marriage ended, he had some financial problems, which is not surprising. Alex was once married to a millionaire, enjoying the finer things in life, and the next minute, he's flat broke. Alex supposedly had a shady criminal past that Abby knew nothing about while they were married, nor was she aware of it after they had gotten divorced. He was running schemes left and right. He was meeting people online, men and women, and he would purposefully mislead them when he took them out on dates. He would tell them that he was a very successful gold dealer and investor that could help them out. On the date, he would take them to a local gold shop and talk them into purchasing mass amounts of gold as an investment, and that he can help show them the way into making money from it. He'd tell them something like, the gold market is down right now, so you gotta buy now. And in a few months, it's gonna turn around and you're gonna make a fortune. Just trust me, you're gonna make a killing. The date would think this is a great opportunity and follow Alex's instructions. They would make a large purchase of gold, and then they would go back to their home for a nightcap. Once inside the residence, Alex would seduce them and sleep with them, and then literally get up and steal the gold from them. He'd just pick up and run off with the gold they had just purchased. So obviously, Alex is a straight up fraudster. Not a good guy, but made a bunch of money from his gold scheme. And the rest of Alex's family was definitely no prize either. The Kwongs were so lucky to have Abby in their life. Abby was so giving and kind. But with Abby helping Alex's family, they slowly but surely became greedy and ungrateful. They were totally entitled. Sweet Abby still didn't mind helping out the Kwong family emotionally, physically, financially, even after they had divorced and she had moved on and found a new lover. Abby had finally met the love of her life, Chris Tam. She was totally smitten and was ready to marry him. Chris is the heir to a massive fortune. He was the heir to the food conglomerate Tam Jai International, which has a long list of restaurant chains founded in Hong Kong. Tam Jai International actually has more than 200 restaurants under their belt. So unlike Abby's ex, Chris was very rich. His family's estimated net worth is around $500 million US. Let that sink in for a moment. Abby and Chris had actually known each other for a long time. They sort of grew up together, first meeting when they were only 10 years old and attending international school. They became the best of friends when they were just kids. Over time, they drifted apart in their friendship, but somehow, years later, they found their way back to each other and reignited that spark. Abby and Chris got married. Well, they didn't actually have an official, legally documented wedding. There was no paperwork filed. They did, however, hold a special symbolic ceremony to celebrate their union with their friends and family. It was beautiful, and the two were absolutely thrilled. After they got married, they settled down and had 2 beautiful kids together. Chris also welcomed Abby's other 2 children into his home with open arms. They were all very happy together. Things were great, life was good. But then, out of nowhere, things changed for the worse. On February 21st, 2023, Abby went missing. Her husband, Chris, was contacted by the kids' school and told him that Abby never showed up to pick the kids up. Chris was an absolute wreck. He knew something was wrong almost immediately. Her last known whereabouts is that she was on her way to pick up her kids from school. However, Abby never showed up to the school. She wasn't answering her phone. Nobody could seem to locate her car. She was nowhere to be found. This had never happened before. Abby had never gone missing or randomly disappeared like this. Her husband and parents first thought that maybe someone knew of their family's wealth, so they had kidnapped her and held her for ransom and tried to squeeze some money out of the family. But nothing ever came from that conspiracy theory. No ransom letter ever came. Abby's husband, Chris, offered up a $2 million reward in Hong Kong dollars to anyone who could help solve Abby's whereabouts. And then the Taiwanese celebrity, Doris, added an additional $1 million to the reward. No leads came forward. The next day, February 22nd, 2023, there was still no sign of Abby. A formal police report was then filed and published, giving details of Abby Choi's disappearance. It said that Abby was last seen around 2:15 p.m. on February 21st, 2023. She was getting into a 7-seater van. She was wearing a white sweater with white pants, white shoes, a white jacket, in a purple handbag. The police urged the public that if anyone had any information involving the whereabouts of Abby Choi to please step forward. Friends and family of Abby were hopeful that Abby would make a quick and safe return home from wherever she had been. However, nobody came forward with any helpful information, and there was still no sign of Abby anywhere. So the police start their investigation, and naturally the first place the police would look would be the family, and of course the ex-family, the Kwong family. The police went to Abby's ex-husband and his family. It became clear very quickly that they were on the right path for the investigation. They were being very suspicious and trying to give the cops the runaround, but the police could see right through it. Each member of the family seemed to tell a different story of Abby's possible whereabouts. They start digging into each member of the family, and each one of them seemed to have probable cause to want to end the life of Abby Choi. It seems that Abby wanted to sell the $10 million luxury condo the family had been living in, and the family obviously was not too happy about that. Even though Abby had promised them she would still help them and relocate them to a different property. Either way, these ungrateful ex-in-laws were pissed that their rich and cushy life was being disrupted. Abby tried to explain to them that the reason for the sale of the house was not to spite them, and that it was purely for investment reasons and to strengthen her real estate portfolio. She would still continue to help them, and they shouldn't worry. Her ex and the ex-in-laws were still skeptical and uneasy with this news Abby was giving them. Basically, they were pissed. And if you recall, Abby had purchased the home but put it in Alex's father's name. So the house appeared to be owned by Alex's father. They wanted to take legal action against Abby so that she couldn't sell the house because it is legally his. So Abby hired some legal counsel to help her. The lawyer basically told her that if she could prove that she's the one who purchased the home, the only one who purchased the home, and that she was the one paying the bills, then that would be sufficient evidence that she is the owner of the property and that she would have the right to sell it. Obviously, Abby could definitely prove that. She was the sole person paying for the house and the expenses. So Abby was able to move forward and put the condo on the market. And the Kwong family was livid. But were they angry enough to potentially harm Abby? The police sure seemed to think so. They began investigating the Kwong family, and they discovered that they had just recently started renting a little house out in the suburbs of Hong Kong. They had actually started renting this random property just 2 weeks before Abby's disappearance. So the police decided to take a little field trip out to visit the rental property, the Tai Po village house. What the police found at the rental property was shocking. This house was super sketchy. It was very clear that nobody was actually living inside the home. The windows were all blacked out so you couldn't see inside. There was a black cloth hanging from the door, so even when you opened the front door, you couldn't see inside. There was no furniture in the house. The only things that were found inside of the house were 2 different types of meat grinders, face shields, an electric saw, a hammer, and multiple black raincoats. They also found a designer purple handbag that belonged to none other than Abby Choi. Inside the bag was all of her credit cards, her ID, and her other personal belongings. The police venture further into the house. They go into the kitchen and find 2 stainless steel pots that were on the stove cooking some sort of soup and what looked like some suspicious looking ground up meat. The 2 pots on the stove were immediately brought in for testing, and what they found was chilling. In one of the pots was radishes, carrots, seasonings, and the remains of Abby's decapitated head. In the second pot was more carrots, vegetables, seasonings, and Abby's ribs and her collarbones. In the freezer, the police find Abby's feet. In another part of the house, the police found Abby's lower part of the body and her legs. But there are still some parts of Abby's body that the police were unable to locate in the rented house or anywhere else, no matter how far or wide they looked. The police extended the search to the local landfill near the kill site, but have since been unsuccessful. The police eventually called off the search, but they said, even though we didn't find them, we obtained strong enough evidence in the case. Although it is unknown exactly what happened to Abby on February 21st, 2023, the police and others have made pretty detailed speculations about what they think happened. The police believe that the murder of Abby Choi had been thought out and planned at least a month in advance, most likely a couple couple months in advance. The police think that Abby was on her way to pick up the kids from school. Alex's brother, Anthony, was driving her. Remember, she hired him to be her personal driver, so this was not out of the ordinary. This was just another regular day. At some point on the drive, they think that Alex pulled over and stopped the car in a tunnel, the Lion Rock Tunnel. Abby would have had no idea what was going on. Then they think while the car was stopped, Alex jumped into the back of the car and started beating Abby while Anthony sped away. Blood splatter was later discovered inside the vehicle, and when brought through testing, was a match to Abby Choi. Once Anthony, Abby, and Alex were all inside the van, the police believe they took her to their rented kill house. There is actually recovered CCTV footage that caught the car, a 7-seater van, pulling into the Tai Po Village neighborhood around 3:12 p.m. on February 21st, 2023. Around that same exact time, that afternoon, the camera shows another car pulling into the neighborhood as well. This vehicle is suspected to be the ex-father-in-law, aka the mastermind behind this entire Abby Choi death plan. Then it is believed that Alex, Anthony, and their father took Abby Choi inside the house where they officially ended her life, dismembered her body, and then attempted to dispose of the body parts. This family literally rented out this house for the sole purpose of killing and dismembering Abby Choi. That is insane. Really gruesome and disturbing for sure. Who did they rent this house from? Well, it turns out that Alex's dear old dad, although he was married, had a mistress. This mistress, Miss Wu, owned the property and rented it out to the Kwong family. Miss Wu was anything but discreet. She was running around town telling her friends how she was seeing a rich married man and that he wanted to take care of her. In return, she rented the house out to him and essentially helped him with the plotting of Abby Choi's murder. So why would the Kwong family murder Abby Choi? Why would they murder the hand that feeds them and literally pays for everything they do? Were they just mad that Abby was selling the home that she had purchased them? Or is there more to the story? Well, the theory is that, if you remember, Abby started a new relationship with Chris. They had a wedding ceremony, but they didn't get legally married. Remember, there was no official paperwork, they just held a symbolic ceremony. So if Abby were to die, all of her money would not go to her lover, Chris. The money would go to her kids, right? And she had 2 kids with Chris and 2 kids with Alex, but none of the kids are old enough to handle the money on their own. So essentially, if Abby died and half of her money went to her and Alex's kids, that Alex would then be put in charge of the funds as he would be the sole caretaker of the kids. Alex would become a very rich man again. He would inherit half of Abby Choi's humongous fortune, and that would be a solid plan if they hadn't gotten caught. But thankfully, they did get caught, and all parties involved in the murder of Abby Choi were arrested. Not all at once, but they eventually got them all. 3 arrests were initially made. First to be arrested was Anthony, the ex-brother-in-law / personal driver of Abby Choi, arrested for murder. Along with Anthony, her ex-father-in-law was arrested for the murder of Abby Choi, and the ex-mother-in-law was arrested for helping Alex escape and perverting the course of justice. Because at that point in the case, Alex was missing. He knew the police were onto him, so he was on the run. But the police finally find Alex and make the necessary arrests. Where was Alex? Well, his plan was to flee Hong Kong in a speedboat, but that plan was spoiled because the police found him walking on a popular pier before he could board the boat. They found Alex with $65,000 in cash in his pockets and $500,000 worth of watches. Shockingly, more arrests were made on the Abby Choi case. It didn't end there. A 29-year-old woman was also arrested after she fled to mainland China to avoid prosecution, authorities said. The unnamed woman was handed over to Hong Kong authorities at a border checkpoint in Shenzhen, which links the China city to the quasi-independent Hong Kong. What's this mystery woman's connection to the murder? She's accused of trying to help Choi's ex-husband Alex to flee by boat. In addition to that, a 41-year-old man was also arrested for possibly trying to help Alex escape by boat. And apparently there was another woman accused of hiding one of the suspects, Alex, but she's been released on bail pending the filing of charges, police said. So that brings the total number of criminals up to 7. Yes, a total of 7 people were arrested following the unfortunate death of Abby Choi. So many people were involved to try and pull this off. It's crazy. But the bottom line is that the police have been able to arrest all parties involved in the murder of Abby Choi. But as I mentioned, the case is still ongoing, so maybe there are more people involved, and there is no way they can get out of this. There's far too much evidence stacked against every single one of them. I feel so sorry for Abby, her parents, her husband, and her 4 precious children. This truly is a tragedy. As I mentioned earlier, this case is still very new, so more information will be rolling out as time goes on. So keep an eye out for that. The case of Abby Choi's death brought sadness to the whole community of Hong Kong and made headlines internationally. The high-profile nature of the case also brought some older notorious murder cases to the light, including serial killer Lam Kor Wan, the Braemar Hill murders of 1985, and the Hello Kitty murder case of 1999. This case reminds me a lot of the Lam Kor Wan case. Lam Kor Wan was a taxi driver in China who would pick up young females and then attempt to strangle them. He would strangle them with electrical wire, drive them back to his house, and then dismember their bodies. This case reminds me of Abby because of the innocent young women who fell victim to Lam Kor Wan, but also because of the car kidnapping, taking them back to the kill site, and dismembering the bodies. There are a lot of similarities there. The Abby Choi case also reminds me of the brutal Braemar Hill murders of 1985. A brief history: the Braemar Hill murders of 1985 were a high-profile case in Hong Kong where a British couple, Noel and Chi Ming, or also known as Annie Jones, were brutally murdered in their apartment in the Braemar Hill area. The couple's 2 children, aged 10 and 12 at the time, were also tied up and left alive in the apartment. The investigation into the Braemar murders was very lengthy and complex. There were multiple suspects being highly considered, but eventually they cleared. The case remained unsolved for many years until in 2012, a man named Wong Chi-wai was finally arrested and charged with the murders. They finally caught the guy. Wong Chi-wai was a former police officer who had been fired for corruption, and he was reportedly linked to the crime through DNA evidence. In 2014, Wong was found guilty of the murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. So the Braemar Hill murders are similar to the Abby Choi case because Abby's ex-father-in-law was also a former police officer who later went on to commit murder. We should be expecting a former police officer to be a good citizen that is incapable of causing any kind of harm to others. They took a vow to help and protect people. It is so disheartening that a police officer could become so corrupt. It's a scary thought. The Braemar Hill murders had a significant impact on Hong Kong society and were widely covered by the media at the time. The case also contributed to a glowing public perception that crime in Hong Kong was on the rise and that the police were struggling to maintain law and order. Lastly, Abby Choi's tragic story also reminds me of the Hello Kitty murders of 1999. The Hello Kitty murder case is a notorious murder case that occurred in Hong Kong in 1999. The victim was a 23-year-old woman named Fan Man Yi, who worked as a hostess in a nightclub in Wan Chai. Fan had been abducted and held captive in a small apartment in Tsuen Wan for over a month by a group of 4 people, including 3 men and a woman. During this time, she was repeatedly tortured and raped before being murdered. The case earned its nickname because of the discovery of a Hello Kitty doll at the crime scene. Fan's body was dismembered and her head was boiled in a pot on the stove before being disposed of in the garbage. Obviously, you can see the connection between Abby Choi's story and the Hello Kitty murders, right? Dismemberment and soup. And just to give you some peace of mind, the 4 perpetrators, led by a man named Chan Man Lok, were eventually arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, and various other crimes. Chan was sentenced to life imprisonment, while the other 3 received lesser sentences. There are some crazy true crime stories from all over the world, but today's episode covers the gruesome murder of young mother and socialite Abby Choi. How do you guys at home feel about Abby's story? After hearing about all of that, how do you feel about remaining friends with your ex after your break? After hearing about all of that, how do you feel about remaining friends with your ex after you break off the relationship? Good idea or a bad idea? Do you think there was any way that Abby could have avoided this horrible outcome? Do you want us to go into more detail about any of the other cases mentioned in this episode? The Lam Kor Wan case, the Braemar murders, or the Hello Kitty murders? Please let us know any and all of your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm Brandy, and thanks for watching Killer Bites.